Orange, Ryunosuke Akutagawa. It was a cloudy winter evening. I sat in the corner of a second-class carriage on a train departing from Yokosuka, idly waiting for the whistle to signal our departure. Unusually, I was the only passenger in the carriage, which had already been lit with electric lamps. When I glanced outside, I noticed that the platform was also unusually deserted. Not even a single person could be seen seeing off the train, just a small dog occasionally barking sadly. This scene curiously reflected my mood at the time. My mind was weighed down by an inexplicable fatigue and ennui. Like the overcast, snow-laden sky outside, I kept my hands buried deep in the pockets of my coat, too listless even to pull out the evening newspaper tucked there. Soon, the whistle blew. Feeling a faint sense of relief, I rested my head against the window frame, idly waiting for the station to begin slipping backward. But before that happened, the sharp sound of wooden clogs clacking on the pavement echoed from the ticket gate. Shortly after, I heard the conductor scolding someone, and then the door to my compartment swung open. A girl around 13 or 14 years old hurriedly entered the carriage. At that moment, the train jolted forward and slowly began to move. The columns of the platform slipped past one by one, the water tanker left behind, and a porter saying farewell to someone inside the train. All these things receded through the soot blowing against the window. Finally, I felt a small sense of peace. Lighting a cigarette, I lazily raised my eyes and took a glance at the girl seated across from me. She was a rural-looking girl, with her hair slicked back and tied into a simple bun. Her cheeks, which bore the marks of some rash or rough weather, were flushed a startling red, making her appearance quite unsightly. Draped around her neck was a dirty yellow-green woolen scarf that hung loosely over her lap, where she clutched a large bundle wrapped in a furoshiki cloth. In her chapped hands, she held a third-class red ticket, gripping it as if it were precious. I found her uncouth face unappealing. Her disheveled appearance also disgusted me. Lastly, her ignorance of the difference between second and third class made me angry. Hoping to forget about her presence, I picked up the evening paper from my pocket and began skimming through it. Just as I did, the light filtering through the window suddenly changed, replaced by the electric lamps inside the carriage. The poorly printed letters on the newspaper seemed to leap into clearer focus. The train had entered the first of many tunnels along the Yokosuka line. Yet, however, as I scanned the illuminated newspaper, the mundane content did little to relieve my melancholy. The headlines were filled with the same tedious events: peace negotiations, newlyweds, bribery scandals, and death notices. For a brief moment, as the train entered the tunnel, I had the strange sensation that the direction of the train had reversed. Mechanically, I read through one bleak article after another. Yet, I could not help but remain acutely aware of the young girl sitting across from me, who, with her unsophisticated demeanor, seemed to embody the banal reality of life itself. The train in the tunnel, this country girl, the dreary articles filling the evening paper. They all seemed like symbols of life's incomprehensible, lowly, and tedious nature. I felt a wave of disgust for everything, tossed the newspaper aside, and leaned my head against the window frame once again. Closing my eyes as if dead, I began to drift into a light, restless slumber. Some time passed. Suddenly, I felt an inexplicable sense of unease, as if something had startled me, and I instinctively glanced around. To my surprise, the girl from earlier had, at some point, moved from her seat to sit beside me and was now struggling to open the window. However, the heavy glass pane wasn't budging as easily as she seemed to hope. Her already chapped and flushed cheeks were now even redder, and I could hear her sniffling as she labored, short breaths escaping her lips with every effort. The sound evoked a slight sense of pity in me, though not enough to truly move me. But I immediately realized that we were approaching the entrance to another tunnel. The barren, pale slopes of the hills on either side were growing closer, an unmistakable sign. Why this girl was intent on opening the firmly closed window just before we entered the tunnel, I couldn't understand. To me, it seemed no more than a whim typical of her lack of understanding or sense. So, with frustration still brewing deep inside me, I coldly watched as her frost-bitten hands fought in vain to lift the window pane. I almost hoped she wouldn't succeed. But soon, with a violent rush of sound, the train plunged into the tunnel, and at that very moment, the glass window she had been struggling with fell down with a thud. From the square opening, a thick, suffocating blackness, as if dissolved soot, rushed in, immediately filling the carriage with a stifling cloud of smoke. I had a pre-existing throat condition, and without even having time to raise a handkerchief to my face, I was engulfed in the smoke, coughing uncontrollably, barely able to breathe. Yet, the girl seemed completely oblivious to my distress. She leaned out of the window, her face exposed to the wind, her tightly pulled back hair fluttering in the draft, and stared intently ahead in the direction the train was moving. In that moment, bathed in the murky mix of smoke and lamplight, I watched her and felt an urge to scold her. If it hadn't been for the sudden shift, if the outside world hadn't quickly brightened again, bringing with it the sharp sense of earth, dried grass, and water from the fields rushing into the carriage, I would surely have reprimanded the unknown girl, forcing her to close the window. But I stopped short as the air began to clear. By that time, the train had smoothly emerged from the tunnel and was passing by a desolate crossing squeezed between hills of dried grass. Around the crossing, shabby straw and tile-roofed houses were cramped together, and a single pale flag, likely waved by the crossing guard, lazily fluttered in the evening gloom. Just as I thought we had finally exited the tunnel, I spotted, beyond the dreary crossing gate, 3 boys with flushed cheeks standing closely together, almost as if the gray sky itself had pressed them down, making them seem even smaller. They all wore clothes in dull colors that matched the bleak scenery of this impoverished outskirts. As the train approached, they raised their hands in unison, craning their necks to shout something incomprehensible, their voices rising in a high-pitched, excited chorus. At that very moment, the girl who had been leaning halfway out of the window suddenly extended her frost-bitten hands and waved them vigorously. In that instant, 5 or 6 vibrant oranges, glowing like the warm sun, scattered through the air, raining down on the children standing by the tracks. I gasped in surprise. In that instant, I understood everything. The girl, likely on her way to begin a new life in service, had kept those oranges tucked away in her pocket and had thrown them from the window as a gesture of gratitude to her brothers who had come all the way to the crossing to see her off. The gray outskirts of the town, the 3 boys with their bird-like cries, and the brilliant oranges falling down around them, all of it passed by the train window in an instant. But the scene was etched deeply into my mind, so vividly that it pained me, From that moment, I felt a strange, inexplicable warmth welling up inside me. I raised my head proudly and looked at the girl again, as if seeing her for the first time. She had already returned to her seat in front of me, her chapped cheeks buried in her worn yellow-green scarf. Clutching her large bundle in her lap, she still firmly held her third-class ticket. In that moment, for the first time, I was able to forget the indescribable fatigue and boredom, and the confusing, base, and monotonous life that had weighed so heavily on me.